There's a saying recorded in Luke 4:23 that says, "Physician, heal thyself." In that passage, the people were challenging Jesus to prove his credibility by doing in his hometown the same miracles he had done elsewhere. Over time, that saying has taken on another meaning. Now people use it to suggest that we should fix our own problems before pointing out or trying to correct the flaws in others. So when someone like me does the kind of work that I do, it's natural to wonder whether I'm qualified to offer the guidance that I share. Have I first done the work that I'm asking you to do? But listen, long before I ever wrote a book or completed my doctorate, I spent years examining my own beliefs, the experiences that shaped them, the conclusions I carried into adulthood, and the impact they had on my life. That's why doing this work matters so deeply to me. My goal, again, isn't simply to share ideas. It's to walk alongside you as you begin understanding how your own experiences have shaped the way you see yourself, other people, and the world around you. And with that, hello and welcome to Daring Woman. I'm Dr. Latasha Pinckney, and through my work, I help people better understand the experiences, beliefs, and perspectives that shape how they see themselves, others, and the world around them so they can move forward with greater clarity, awareness, and intention. Whether you've been here for a while or you're new here, well, welcome to the channel. Now let's get into it. In the last episode, I shared the moment I came to believe I was unloved. What I want to explore in this episode is what happened after that. The little girl who believed she was unloved eventually became the woman who struggled to understand what love looked like. On some level, I knew I was loved. I knew that people cared about me, but for whatever reason, I just couldn't seem to grasp what love looked like when it was extended to me. It was almost as if love moved all around me, but never quite settled inside me. The challenge with beliefs is that they follow us into every season of life, shaping how we see ourselves, how we interpret other people, and even how we understand something as fundamental as love. Before long, we stop evaluating each situation on its own and begin filtering it through what we've already concluded to be true. So even when love was present, I could question it. Even when people cared, I could wonder if they really did. Even when nothing had changed, an old belief could quietly shape the meaning I assigned to what was happening. There are few places where our beliefs about love are revealed more clearly than in our closest relationships. By the time I got married, I wasn't the little girl sitting on that couch anymore. I was a grown woman. And in many ways, marriage became a mirror. It reflected beliefs I had been carrying for years, even though at the time I couldn't see it. Because my faith was important to me and I believed in the sanctity of marriage, I wanted my marriage to succeed. My husband and I both wanted the same things: a strong marriage, a stable home, and the best life we could give to our children. What I didn't recognize was that I had brought more into my marriage than my hopes, my dreams, and my commitment. I had also brought the conclusions I made years earlier. One of the greatest challenges I faced wasn't questioning whether I loved my husband. It was understanding what love looked like when it was being given to me. As a child, I had learned to measure love by what was missing. So I entered marriage having never really seen a healthy marriage up close. As I've shared before, my mother was a single parent, my grandmother too, and the closest example I witnessed was my aunt's tumultuous marriage. Most of what I thought being a wife, what that looked like, came from television and from watching the women in my community. I saw what a wife did, but I didn't have many examples of what it looked like for a husband and wife to simply relate to one another. So I understood many of the responsibilities of being a wife, but I had very little understanding of the relationship itself. I knew how to do what I believed a wife was supposed to do, but I wasn't sure I understood what it meant to simply be a wife. What I wasn't prepared for was allowing someone to love the parts of me I had spent years trying to protect. Growing up, there were very few places where I felt emotionally safe. So protecting myself felt like the safest way to avoid being hurt again. What that looked like for me was creating distance. I built walls and kept people far enough away so that they couldn't hurt me the way I'd been hurt before. As time passed, those walls just got stronger. With every friendship that faded and every relationship that changed, instead of seeing those experiences as a normal part of life, they only reinforced what I had believed since I was a little girl. The more people came and went, the more I convinced myself that the safest thing I could do was rely on myself. By the time I got married, I had already been programmed by self-sufficiency, and emotional intimacy became difficult. I struggled to go beyond the surface of our relationship because trusting my husband meant believing he truly had my best interests at heart. So while my husband was getting to know me, I was trying to determine whether it was safe to even let him. It didn't take long before those old beliefs began influencing the way I responded to everyday situations. Like most marriages, we had our fair share of disagreements. Sometimes they were about money, sometimes they were about parenting. There were also times I felt like I was carrying more of the responsibility at home. Those were real issues, and I'm not suggesting they weren't. But no matter what we were talking about, I always found that I was trying to over-explain myself. Whether we were in the middle of a disagreement or I was simply trying to explain why I felt the way I did, I wanted my husband to understand where I was coming from. But no matter how I tried, I often felt misunderstood. That's why I would often tell my husband, we aren't on different pages, we're in different books. And what made those moments especially difficult for me was the meaning I attached to them. When I felt like my husband didn't see or understand me, I wasn't just responding to the disagreement we were having. To me, it often felt like confirmation that what I had believed about myself since I was a little girl was true. So instead of experiencing those moments for what they were, I often interpreted them through the belief that I was unloved or somehow a burden. And when I felt misunderstood, that's when I put my guard up and became defensive. For a long time, I thought those responses were just part of who I was. But with time, I came to understand that they reflected something much deeper. The little girl who believed she was unloved didn't just disappear because I became an adult. That conclusion had become the lens through which she understood the relationships that mattered the most. Understanding that changed the way I saw myself. What I had assumed were simply parts of my personality were actually responses to beliefs I'd been carrying for years. It also changed the way I began to understand my husband. Just as I had brought my experiences, beliefs, and conclusions into our marriage, he had brought his. We were both trying to love one another through stories that had started long before we ever met. None of that erased the challenges we faced, but it gave me a different way of looking at them. The problem wasn't simply that I reached the wrong conclusion as a little girl. It was that I continued living from that conclusion from years afterward. If those conclusions had shaped the way I thought, then they were also shaping the way I lived. When I think about what the Apostle Paul writes in Romans 12:2, I am reminded of how easily our experiences can shape the way we see ourselves. Left unexamined, we can spend years living from conclusions that feel true, but don't necessarily align with God's truth. The world has a way of teaching us who we are through our experiences, our disappointments, and our pain. But God invites us to measure what we've come to believe about ourselves against His truth instead of the conclusions we've carried for years. Knowing all of this doesn't mean that the little girl no longer exists. The little girl who sat on that couch believing she was unloved is still very much a part of me. How could she not be? She is woven into the fabric of my very existence. The difference is that today she knows she isn't alone. She knows that she doesn't have to protect herself the way she once did. She knows she doesn't have to make sense of the world by herself. And when those old fears begin to surface, I'm there to remind her that she's safe. So let me leave you with this. Are there moments in your life that have taken on a meaning they were never meant to carry? Are there conclusions you've been living from for so long that they've simply become part of the way you see yourself and the people around you? And is there a younger version of you that's still influencing the way you respond today? Thank you so much for tuning in. It's not lost on me that so many of you continue to show up here week after week, and for that I am truly grateful. As we continue to build this space together, I hope it becomes a place of refuge and understanding, a place where you feel safe enough to ask difficult questions and examine the experiences, beliefs, and perspectives that have shaped your life with honesty and compassion. And in usual fashion, if today's conversation resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. So leave a comment below and be sure to like, share, and subscribe so these messages can reach those who need it. And until next time, keep reflecting, keep growing, and remember that sometimes the most powerful shifts begin with a single question.